Well, as I often say, I am so excited about the guest today, and I genuinely do mean that. One of the greatest gifts of doing this podcast is being able to talk with people who are not only friends and colleagues, but also people who I have great respect for, who are making a difference in the deeper healing for LGBTQ folks. So our guest today is Kat Grissetti. She is the Chief Clinical Officer of Monima Behavioral Health, which includes Monima Wellness Center for Women and also Element Q Healing Center for LGBTQ folks. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Kat, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we've been talking about having this conversation for a while, and I'm hearkening back to a panel discussion we recently did that I thought was so incredibly rich. And I think that might be a really nice place to start. We talked about a couple of things that I think would maybe be a great place to start the conversation. One is the difference between trauma-informed and trauma-focused. I loved that conversation and would love to continue that. And then the other thing is, as we sit with what our folks are working with in the LGBTQ plus community, the weight of that, both individually and collectively, I think there's a lot to unpack there. So wherever you want to start, I'm ready. How's
Awesome.
that?
I can talk about this all day.
I know you can. I love it.
So for me, thinking about the, body of work that I've moved throughout my career, I am first and foremost a social worker. I'm a therapist. And then as the years have kind of moved forward, have kind of collected different titles. But at the heart of all of it, I really do focus on trauma work. And when I think about trauma-focused work in the behavioral healthcare space, I'm not just thinking about the individual interventions that are given to clients, right? We can have our traditionals, which are, EMDR, CPT, all of the letters and acronyms. But I think about the environment and the holding space and really thinking intentionally about what does that mean to hold people's stories day in and day out. And when I think about that, I think about what's the wellness that occurs for the team that is providing service, right? And when we think about that, there's no magic answer, right? And that comes with deeply knowing a team and deeply knowing the work that is being done within the walls of a treatment space. And so with that, thinking about the perpetual amassing of vicarious trauma. In our spaces, we have people who are putting down their stories that are incredibly heavy. And to be able to do that work day in and day out, we really do need to think about what is being done to care for the team. And that might be something as seemingly simple as aesthetic and environment. Is it a space that you can come to every day? What are the training opportunities? How are we able to collaborate with each other to be able to collectively hold the trauma that is being processed in the spaces? And so when I think about trauma-focused care, it means that the epicenter of all conversation and all action really is about the client experience, but also the staff experience. And so
Well, I think that's such an important thing to focus on. And I love that you do that. And as you know, that's one of my greatest passions as well. And I sort of eased into that because when I first launched Conscious Recovery, I would go in and do these one-day experiences. And I quickly realized the importance. I mean, I knew it intellectually, but to experience it was something different, to see what it is actually like to be on the front lines, which we are, and hearing these stories stories and absorbing them. How do we work with that, right? But then also knowing, and if I may be bold, I think we all come
Please.
into the, it's a sweeping generalization. I will acknowledge that. But in my experience, we come into the field because we have our own trauma history, whether that be in our family or ourselves directly, whether it's an addiction and recovery story, a mental health concern. And so not only are we present for and holding, because you talked about holding, perhaps an overused term, and yet such an important one,
So
holding
accurate.
space, right? So accurate. And I love it. Not only are we hearing these stories and the vicarious trauma is real, but it also can be touching something from our own journey. So I love that you lean into wellness for the team as such an important thing, not only for the team, but also obviously for the clients.
Absolutely. It's a reciprocal relationship. The team is the most valuable piece of the work that we do. Something can happen. I don't know if we want to call it a phenomenon or a pattern, but something that I think can get lost when it's just day in and day out without the attunement to the importance of the stories is that for every client who comes in, it is their first experience sharing with this team. When you work in this field, if you've done it for years, you have a pattern, you know the interventions, you know how to work with it. But I think keeping that trauma focus is so important because it allows that first interaction to truly be a first between two people. Our clients who are coming here, they have not experienced our level of treatment. And when they come in, it's really giving the team the opportunity to see them as a human first. And I think that that's something that can get really lost in trauma care because it's like, oh no, I've heard this story before. And the answer is no, you haven't, because you haven't heard it from this person. This is their first. And so being able to continuously build those new relationships is something that is so important because every person's traumatic experience or experiences are completely different because it is unique to them. And so giving bandwidth and space to hold those unique experiences is I think for me the most important piece of that trauma focus.
Yeah, and you mentioned attunement, which I want to lean into. I want to attune to that and lean in
Yes.
because ultimately that's what we're doing, right? We're really,
Yeah.
when we talk about holding space or we talk about, really to me, it's a sacred space of the first time we're sharing with one another. But I also think sometimes for our clients, it might be the first time they're sharing it ever. Now,
Ever.
that's not true for every client, but sometimes it is. But to hold that in a sacred way and to attune to that, and I say sacred because it's easy, I think, sometimes for us, as you said, to like, I've heard this before, or I've done this
Mhm.
before, or I know the
Or
intervention.
I know what to do. And
Right.
it's like, no, we've never met this person. This is our first meet cute of their unique story. So we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
We will figure it out and lean on expertise, but we don't know what to do because we have not met this person with this story yet.
Yeah. And ultimately, the power is in the client hearing it, feeling it, recognizing it for themselves. And then we're really here to guide them in that journey, much different than I'm the expert and I know about your
Correct.
trauma or I know about trauma and here's the things you can do or the tools you can do. And I think that's where we move completely from trauma informed, meaning like I've been trained on trauma, so I know what I'm doing here, to
Yes.
trauma focused, which is like really being present in the moment and letting that client guide their own journey.
Absolutely. Really, it's a collaborative experience. And to be able to collaborate in a creative way all of the time needs that bandwidth. And it really does create something just so special. And I love your language of sacred. These are stories that for many of our clients have haunted them, that have been stuck points. And if they're able to share their story and think about their story in new ways, not just intellectually, but somatically learning what's happening within your body, what's happening within your relationships. It's really creating a new paradigm for the clients because they are sharing their story with their own agency, with the intention of the person across from them just deeply wanting to know
Yeah.
what is your unique place.
Yeah, and let's lean into the somatic piece, because we talk about somatic, but I'd love to hear from you. Maybe someone's watching or listening right now and has somewhat of a sense, or maybe there's someone watching or listening that this is brand new for them. So
Yeah.
let's talk about what that means and the importance of, in a somatic way, what's showing up in the body, not just in the mind. So it's not just our narrative or talking about the relationships we're having, but it's really, as you said, being aware of what's showing up also in our body in this very moment, not something in the past.
Yes, absolutely. And so when I think about this, I want to talk about a term that is often overused and misused. So when we think about something that is somaticized, right? Or if it is something that it's like, oh no, that's just a somatic presentation. It's not a cognitive presentation, right? I really want to break down the fact that when something is somatic, right, it does not mean that it's in the person's head, right? And I think so often that's what people colloquially think is that's just in your head. No, that's not what that means, right? And so when something is coming out in a somatic presentation, it's because it lives in the body's nervous system, right? It lives in the command center. And so when we think about the stages of kind of the brain and awareness, the brain is always trying to protect you, right? We have learned through traumatic experiences that we need to be aware and alert, right? And so the brain learns I have to be aware and alert all the time. It's something that in non-contextual spaces we would classify as hypervigilance, right? But no, it's not hypervigilance. It's vigilance because your body has learned that in order to protect myself, in order to be present for danger that might occur, I always need to be on, right? And often that can come with a diminished capacity to recognize the current context. And so when we think about somatics, right, it's your body. When your brain, right, has learned the world is not safe, we don't have the time to walk up to a situation and say, I wonder what is happening. Your brain, your instinct takes over to be vigilant. And that can come out in certain ways somatically, whether it is muscle tension, whether it is migraines, whether it's nausea, clenched body posture, all of these things that, if you think about the context, if your body, right, was in a dangerous situation, you would want your pupils dilated. You would want your muscles tensed because you need to be able to get out of the situation faster. What translates is that many people who have experienced trauma, the brain does not know how to come out of that because it is not safe.
Mhm.
And so when we think about the somatic piece, I want you to think about there are intellectual ways of knowing, and then there are somatic ways of knowing. Your body knows. And just like intellectual information, sometimes there's challenges to that. So when you think about the somatic piece, it is that your body is remembering what has occurred in your past and it is working to keep you safe, even when the environment doesn't dictate the fact that it actually is safe.
And why this is so important, and I'm coming alive because this is so great. I think sometimes we tend to refer to these things as like coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms. I call them brilliant strategies because I like to use
Yes.
everyday terms that a client might say, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way. So when you're talking about what happens in the nervous system, I know in my own journey, I'll speak in my own journey, once I became aware of that, I thought something was wrong with that. I shouldn't be in this, and I would have used the term hyperstate of arousal, meaning like, oh, I'm aware that my nervous system is in this fight, flight, or freeze. Right now we have fawn. I think there might even be a fifth one now.
Yep.
But we have an automatic response that's telling us that it's not safe. The key here, and this is what I want to explore even a little bit more, is we don't only work with that cognitively. Now, sometimes we can work with that cognitively, but if we were to say to someone, oh, don't worry, you're safe, that is going to be the exact opposite of what we want to do. We want to recognize that it's there for a reason and to look at it through the lens of what's brilliant about it. And then the other avenue to go down is what we're really doing in either a session or a group, because they're both very valuable, slightly different, but ultimately the same. We're creating enough safety where that nervous system can slow down. And then someone might realize experientially, oh, I can be with myself a little more than I realized, right? I can allow myself to calm down. And when you talk about the physical space, when you talk about like creating safe containers and groups, all of that is to work with that nervous system. We don't name it necessarily. We might tell the client, have you noticed this, or this, but it's really more experiential.
Yes, absolutely. And I kind of love what you were saying in your own story that so often, people will say there's something wrong with me. And what I love to frame it as is your nervous system, your body's doing what it's learned, and it is working in overdrive to try to protect you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't intellectually make sense, but in the body, it makes sense. So when you think about the vagus nerve, it's one of the few systems in the body that has reciprocity. So in the behavioral health field, we talk about top-down and bottom-up coping strategies. And so often the reason why folks may have experienced therapy or different things that feel like they just don't work, when we think about bottom-up strategies, it is bringing the body into a space of awareness and using slow and deliberate movement, interoception, proprioception, to get the body regrounded. Because if we can get our body grounded, then that really signals to the mind, it's okay to relax and come out of that fight or flight. A difficult part of the therapeutic experience is that once we get out of that fight or flight, right, the prefrontal cortex of the brain comes back online, and that's where really nuanced emotion lives. Yep. And so very often we'll have people say, well, I've lived in fight or flight for so long, and now that I kind of have a little bit of a handle on this, I feel so much worse, right? And my question and curiosity to that is always, do you feel a lot worse, or do you just have access to a lot more things that you didn't when you were in this constant state or fight or flight for many clients for years? And not just clients, I want to shift that language. People, right? Mm-hmm. People are living their lives day in and day out in this state without even recognizing it. And once we utilize this somatic availability to bring the brain back to a place of homeostasis, all of a sudden the nuanced emotions exist. And that is where a lot more of the, what I'll use in quotes, is traditional therapies are far more effective. And so that is where, again, the somatic piece and the intellectual piece, they have to work in tandem. Right. And so often it's a this or a that. In reality, it should be this and that all the time.
Well, and it's also knowing, as you're saying, it's an art, not a science, right? It's an art form of really working with the person sitting in front of you and what they're experiencing. And of course, the cliche is when the nervous system slows down, you're going to feel better. You're going to feel everything better, right? And it may show up as a thought of like, I'm feeling worse, but the truth is we're feeling better. Yes. Simply said, all I mean by that is like these feelings do come up, right? And then our mind tries to figure out what's happening, and we can go into a narrative, or we can go into a story, or we can label it as good, bad, right, wrong. That's why I'm always really careful, because I've gone into treatment programs, mostly substance use treatment programs, but programs where they will have positive emotions and negative emotions literally listed as like, move away from these emotions and into these, right? Be filled with joy, not filled with sadness. And I was thinking about the animated movie Inside Out. I used to show that to clients years ago when it came out. And there's this beautiful moment in the movie where the character Sadness, allows herself to feel. And as she allows herself to feel, they demonstrate it so beautifully. The joy and the sadness then merge, right? And that together. Right. And it's not the avoiding these feelings. It's being able to allow ourselves to feel them. And of course, we know it's important not to rip everything off all at once and expect someone to feel everything. But we don't have to, as human beings or as clinicians or as people providing it's the same. And I appreciate that you said that. We don't need to go fishing for it, if you will. We simply work with to me, I love that you're talking about them working in tandem, because as the nervous system slows down, these emotions are going to come up, and then we can start working with whatever comes up for some people in a very new way, because they haven't even felt them. And a lot of times people have this sense that if I feel this, I'm going to get trapped there. But the truth is the opposite. It's in the avoiding that keeps them
Yes.
alive for years or decades.
And it keeps it so much more powerful, right? The avoidance of it keeps it so much more powerful, whether it is a willing avoidance or if the nervous system has literally kept us away from it, it is still avoidance.
Yeah.
And that can be really scary when it's like, all right, I am starting to experience these things as adults. There's still a lot of firsts to be had, right? And so much of what we're walking through is firsts in these walls, right? This is the first experience that somebody is having trying to hold the infinite complexities that comes with human emotions. And so walking alongside somebody as they are having those firsts is very hard, especially in a trauma experience, in a brain that has experienced trauma, a body that has experienced trauma. Firsts are really hard because we have no information to connect it all to. And so walking through a lot of firsts, again, as adults can be really hard, and it can be scary, and it can be taxing and deeply emotional. But once we have those firsts, we can start to reorient so that we're having these new experiences. And then on the next step, having new understandings about ourselves within the world.
Yeah, and two things that are showing up for me that I would like to kind of, highlight a bit. One is sometimes, old school trauma therapy was we go back and re-experience the trauma and we talk about the trauma.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it day in and day out.
We're going to talk about it day in and day out. And a very, perhaps an unskilled person will think, oh, look, the depth is happening because this person is crying or this person.
Sobbing. Yeah.
They're sobbing, right? We're now, that shifted dramatically, and we're much more aware of what's showing up in the present moment. Now, having said that, what's interesting is even if it's not a memory, right, a cognitive memory, like, oh, this feels like it did when I was 7 and this traumatic event happened, the body will often recognize that it's the same. Yep. And so I'm going to start to re-experience or experience. And then I think we can then in some ways have a psychoeducational experience, meaning we can offer a framework where it's like, yeah, maybe, in a traumatic experience, the nervous system comes in to protect ourselves from feeling primarily when it's an emotional trauma. And so, of course, later in life, when we start to work on this, it is safe. Oh my gosh, we're going to start to feel that which we weren't able to feel before. And I think that's really important. We don't necessarily have to connect the dots like, oh, I wonder if this is like it was when you were 7. We wouldn't want to do that. But that part of it is really healing. And then, like you said, sometimes then we can bring in the cognitive piece and start to frame it through how does this relate to your trauma once we're reached a certain point. How am I doing with that? Is that
I
what you're
think
saying?
you are putting it brilliantly. Absolutely. And another piece that, I think is so important in the trauma work is when I think about trauma, it's not just the experiences that happened and the somatic experiences and the cognitive experience, the relational experiences. I also think of, and it can be hard to quantify, but what has been lost because of trauma, right? What has been lost? And I often think of levity and joy and deep connection. And so we're also doing this work because we're creating space for some of those firsts, where many of our clients, ask, when's the last time you from the gut laughed, right? When you laugh so hard, you feel like you're going to cry. A lot of times that the emotional availability is stunted in that fight or flight. And that doesn't just mean I'll put it in quotes again, the negative emotions, because there are no such things as negative emotions, but it also puts a cap on somebody's ability to experience that joy. And so when we do this work, I love to focus on what are we creating space for? And some of that are those experiences of just that deep and profound joy.
It's so interesting you're saying this, and I think it's important because it can often be overlooked. I'm thinking about a lot of people who I've worked with, even recently at Element Q, who have experienced shame from the loss of the years, right? So I like to say if I had $10 for every time someone said, I'm 40, I should be finished working through this. I'm 28, I thought I'd be finished.
Mhm.
I thought I was finished working through this now, right? But there is sometimes this loss, as you're saying, of like when someone starts to thaw out, and I'll put it that way, because the nervous system starts to relax, and then they're like, oh my gosh, and I'll use this in quotes because this is what I hear people saying, I wasted all those years.
Yes.
I can't believe I'm just finally addressing this. I wasted all that time being in this heightened, sense
Mhm.
of fear. How do we work with that? Because I think about shame that comes up, because shame to me, I'm very visual. So I think about shame like swimming in oatmeal. Like no matter how hard I'm trying
Mhm.
to like make traction or swim my life or
Yeah.
move my life, but I just feel not completely stuck, but just sort of like it's like I'm in a
Heaviness.
dream trying to run, but I can't get anywhere.
Absolutely. That is such a common experience. And often I think saying that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? It makes a lot of sense of I've spent years of my life in this pattern that I didn't even know I was participating in.
Yeah.
Is very important to just validate that and not validate that, yes, that's painful, but really validating that experience of sometimes I'll call it like waking up, right? When we're waking up to the impact that this has had in our lives, it can be really easy to then look backwards and say, I lost all of that time,
Yeah.
right? And we didn't lose it, right? We didn't lose it. We were still experiencing it. And I think that this is where a lot of the community healing comes into play.
Hmm.
Um, there is individual and intrapersonal healing, and then there's interpersonal healing, but then there's community healing, which is why I think spaces that are specific to LGBTQ plus populations is so critical because when you have that depth of community, even if you don't individually know each other, there is a shared underpinning of experience that is so critical and so profound that maybe I'm close to 40 and I'm sitting next to somebody who is in their early 20s. There is a beautiful healing process that occurs when I get to see the person sitting next to me that maybe some of my wisdom actually does have a profound impact on my community. That in and of itself is healing and it can give meaning to the experiences that we have had. And I think that that is one of the beautiful parts of this type of work of community and identity-based healing, because we're able to offer parts of ourselves to those maybe in the age bracket that we wish that we were at when we started this whole party.
Yeah, wow. So many layers to that. I love it.
So
And
many.
I think about all these different avenues to go down, but believe it or not, we only have a few minutes left. I feel like, well, I'm going to invite you back to do a part two sometime. No pressure, but I loved this
I'm always into
conversation.
it. I
Okay,
love spending time
good.
with you.
Yeah, I was thinking about the grief of the persona, right? Or the
Yeah.
grief because, when I started in this field, I worked almost exclusively with SUD or people who had
Hmm.
substance use disorder, which is what we call it now. I don't love that term. I don't like to call anyone disordered, just for the
Yeah.
record, but someone who is working through an addiction.
Hmm.
You'll hear people say, but like, who am I without that? Right. And that doesn't even need to be someone who has a substance use issue or they've used that as their brilliant strategy. But anyone who is looking back and saying, oh my gosh, I wasted these years, or I wish I would have, or I wish I could have, all those things that we hear someone say, I think about sometimes grieving that, which has all its stages, all the stages of grief.
Yes. And I think of, back to storytelling, right? When I think about storytelling, people have a running narrative in the back of their mind that often we're not aware of, right? We don't know the tone in which we're narrating our own story, that we're going backwards and narrating our story through. And when we land in that space of profound grief, of these are all the years that I've lost, right? Some movement that we can look at is not a rose-colored glasses perspective, but looking at a true reclaiming of our story of who would I not be if this unique thing didn't happen for me and the process that I went through to get to this space, right? We get to narrate our own experiences in a way that allows us to pull the little glimmers out from that long and storied history and say, this is who I am because of this, right? And I get to define that. It is not for anybody else's understanding. It's for my own understanding to be able to stand in my story in a way that maybe I didn't originally, right? We can't take things away that are time stamped in history, no matter how wonderful or terrible they may be. But I can go backwards and I can re-narrate my own story with a lens that actually in a puts me in a position of abundance rather than a position of I've lost all of this.
Oh my gosh. And you're singing my song now. I love this, right? Because it's an interesting journey. And I know for myself, there were a few times in my journey that I wanted to bypass some of the steps. I just
Yes.
wanted to go, oh, I just want to be grateful. Oh, I
Yep. I
love the
just want to be
rose-colored glasses.
grateful and I just want to be happy.
I just
And
want
it's
to be
like,
happy, and the past is just the past. But ultimately, it's funny because I mean, I use the term funny, but to me, it is because there's a lightness to it that came on the other side of it because it's like, oh
mhm.
my gosh, all these years, my friend Dr. Sue Morter says life is difficult and a struggle until it isn't. And it's
Mhm.
that moment until it isn't that we can't say that moment needs to be now. It's when I get to that. And then, of course, in
Yes.
my own journey, I think everything that happened in my early life made me uniquely available to do this work. So I would never change any of it. But I wanted to bypass the steps of grief and sadness and the fetal position and all the things I got to do. I didn't
Yep.
think that at the time, but now I get
No,
to
at
see
the
that I
time it's brutal. Yeah.
exactly. And no one should tell me that, because the last thing I'd want to say to someone is, what if your trauma is your greatest gift? And I know
Yeah.
we don't do anything close to that, but I have seen that happen sometimes in certain circles. So we'll just leave that there.
Yes.
I'm going to, in a moment, ask you if you have any closing thoughts. Of course, your full bio and contact information for Monima and for Element Q will be in the show notes. Is there anything that you want to say in closing, Kat? And first of all, I've loved this. I
Thank
can't believe it's
you.
been 30 minutes. It feels like it's been 5. So
Yes.
we will definitely do a part 2. But anything you want to say in closing?
I mean, I just first want to thank you. We've known each other for some time now, and it has just been such a joy working alongside of you. And your vantage point is always so appreciated. We both kind of share that same. We like to be a soft landing place, but also be a little bit provocative.
Yeah.
And I think that's how change and shifts in this world happen in the behavioral health world. Not being afraid to challenge and I really just deeply appreciate
Mhm.
you so much. And in closing remarks, I just, for all of the people who work in this world, for all of the people that access services in this world, just thank you. It is a difficult, individualized, and unique experience to be in these walls, both as a professional and as a client. Many of us have sat in both chairs. And I just really want to say continuing to bring awareness and new ideas. And sometimes they're not necessarily new ideas, it's new packaging. All of it's worthy, all of it is valid. And this is a very special space to be in.
Oh, amazing. And for everyone watching, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, I know you've loved this episode, so share it with someone who you think it might help, whether there's someone who is working through a mental health concern, someone who is maybe in treatment, coming out of treatment, or also a professional working in the field or a family member, because I think what Kat shared is so rich and I love this conversation. So it does make a difference for you to like and subscribe. So please do that if you feel called. And thank you, everyone. Until the next time, thank you again very much, Kat. Peace and blessings, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.